Good morning, everyone, again, and welcome to this session. I'm excited to talk to you about this topic called Agile integration. Kind of talk about what is Agile integration, why it's important to you, why an overall platform architectural approach is important today, especially today, as you're dealing with much more of a interconnected, much more of a digital enterprise. So how it can actually help you in your journey from a transformation perspective. A little bit about myself, again, Samir Parulkar. I'm product marketing manager focusing on integration products in Red Hat. I've been with Red Hat for 5 years. Before joining Red Hat, I was a technical architect specializing in integration technology, design, development, deployment, as well as managing the integration technology. Worked in different verticals all the way from healthcare, biotech, to like more or less like an office supplies business, as well as technology companies. So kind of have a good background of what happened in the integration space, and then really excited right now in the last couple of years to be involved in with Red Hat and as part of the integration, the trends and changes that are coming up in the integration today. So we'll talk about that in this session. So again, what I'll cover is or I'll talk about the changing world of integration. Maureen mentioned some of this, spoke a lot about this in terms of the trends. I'm going to just highlight some more of them. Then kind of talk about Agile integration, a new architectural approach, why that's important, how that's going to help you. Also then give some 2 customer examples of customers like you who have already embarked on this journey. And the critical thing with Agile integration is that it's an architectural approach. It's a journey for you. So we'll talk about how some of the customers have already done on that path, and then just introduce the Red Hat technology stack that can help you in this journey. So that's kind of like what I wanted to talk about. If you have any questions while I'm presenting, please raise your hand, and we can kind of try to keep it as much interactive as possible. So let's talk about the changing world of integration, right? I mean, you saw my experience, right? I've been in the industry for 18 years, 19 years, been doing integration for a long time. Simple, why you need integration? You need integration because you want to connect the information that you need to execute your business process is oftentimes in multiple enterprise systems, and has to be connected in some form to execute that business process. Good example, you have maybe a CRM system, and you want to connect that CRM system maybe with your ERP application. Maybe you take care of your you track your customers in your CRM system, but when an order is placed, it goes into your ERP system. How does that happen? Through integration. Another option that I always think about is, okay, when an order is placed, what happens after that? Like if you're dealing with like Amazon or shipping or retail company, what happens with that? How do you get information about your orders? Usually it's a separate system. If you're talking about healthcare or a biotech company, manufacturing is a separate process. There are separate applications. How do you connect them from a regulation compliance process? There are all these different applications that have to be connected in some form to do integration. That's why you need integration. So we have been doing integration for quite a while now. There have been different technologies in the industry, all the way from like EAI technology, or almost like 15, 16 years back, to most recent ESB type of technology or enterprise service bus. And they served the market, they served the need for some time. But what's happening in today's world is that the importance of integration is changing. It's actually becoming even more critical now, especially now when you look at digital services. Let's see how. So the critical thing with this particular slide is that the way you're doing business today is changing, and changing very rapidly. I wanted to highlight 2 main things, and I'm not going to go through these numbers. The numbers are important, but they're numbers. But the 2 key things I wanted to highlight here is, the first one is, if you're as a business today, you have to deal with lots and lots of data. You have to deal with the data. Where is the data coming from? How do I analyze that data? How do you connect that data with other data? And the data could be a big data, could be mobile data, could be social data, IoT, or the API economy data. All of this data, as a business, you have to deal with that. Customer behavior, what are the customer buying patterns? These are all data streams that you have to deal with today. On the other hand, what you have to deal with is the channel by which you reach to your customers is changing. No longer just the web fronts or maybe the store fronts, which were like very popular earlier, but now you have to deal with mobile applications, kiosk. Take an example of what's happening with, say, the car insurance industry today, right? With the car insurance company, typical process, like if you are in an accident, you would have probably, okay, I'm in an accident, I would actually call someone. Okay, I'll get an agent, I'll get a claim number, and then the process starts. Today, oftentimes, this car insurance companies have mobile apps, and through your mobile app, you can actually start that entire process. How does that work, right? You need the data together. You need the channel of communication is different, right? All of this is happening today. The way you reach to your customers is changing. So data, you have to deal with lots of data. And on the other hand, the way you now reach to your customers is changing very rapidly, right? At the same time, when you look at airline industry, you can buy your tickets, you can do your bookings on a mobile device or on a web, doesn't really matter. But say if you go to the airport and if there is a kiosk, all that information just comes with it, and you are able to say. And now, even from an airline perspective, if your gate changes, all of that is linked to your reservation. So I mean, think about it this way, right? As if you're in an airline business or if you're in a mobile application development business, you have to deal with where your customers are. I mean, and oftentimes the customer's expectation is now being redefined. How many of you have heard this term, software is eating the world? Okay, few. So this was a term coined by Mark Andreessen back in 2011. And the main thing that he highlighted when he said software is eating the world is that increasingly companies are using software to create new business models, to reach their customers in new ways, right? They're using them to redefine or go to the market in a much more different way. Today, you see that incumbents in every industry are being challenged by digital-first innovators like, say, Uber or Netflix or Airbnb. And as a business, you have to now really think about, okay, how I'm going to survive in this with all these new trends coming, right? Think about what Netflix did to Blockbuster. And the thing is, if you're in any industry today, the first thing you're going to ask is, I do not want to be the Blockbuster in my industry. Very, very important, right? That's the key thing. Look what's happening in the automobile industry or car manufacturing industry, like Ford or GM for that matter. On one hand, they're getting competition from electric car companies, totally different model. On the other hand, they're getting competition from ride-hailing services like, say, Uber or Lyft. If you're like, say, I heard this case about in India, big market, but big problem with infrastructure. Right? Big problem with infrastructure traffic. So a lot of the people over there are like, I do not even need to buy a car if I can just take a ride-hailing service like Uber or Lyft or Ola, which is very popular in India. But when you think about this, it's a profound change that's happening. So this was a quote by a member of BMW management. He's like, the big question is always, do we car manufacturers learn to become tech companies much more quickly than a tech company learns to be an automotive player? If I just pause here, I'm like, this is very profound in the way you have to now look at your infrastructure and the services that you deliver. It's very important. Technology plays a very, very important role in the way you deliver your services today. So if software is important, if every company it wants to be kind of like a software company, what we're also seeing is that there are now increasing digital touch points. It's easier now to create these digital services. When you look at cloud, when you look at SaaS applications, it's easier to create these services in the cloud. And there are more independently developed, siloed, customer-facing apps, right? The example that Maureen gave about the adoption of SaaS applications, it's increasing. When it's increasing, it's easier for you to procure an application in the cloud. But what's also happening is you have almost 43% have 10 or more digital touch points, because these applications that are developed in the cloud, they don't work in isolation. They have to be connected to something else at some point, right? Similarly, 8% have 100 or more digital touch points. Okay, all this requires integration in some form or the other. I gave this example of Uber. It's kind of sometimes easier to understand this. Is like when you use an Uber app, As a customer, you want to go from point A to point B, and Uber provides a curated experience to do that. But behind the scenes, there are lots of things that are happening. Uber tries to connect the payment services, the mapping services, the customer like a rating services. At the end, as a customer, when I'm taking that ride, I don't care how this all works. But for me, I get from point A to point B, and I'm done with it, right? Beauty of this is, even from a payment perspective, my payment carries forward with me. Even if I go in a different country, it's all taken care of. I don't have to, and I have multiple payment options. But behind the scenes, these are all individual discrete services that have to be connected together in some form to provide you, a customer, that experience. That's what integration does. This was another quote that I really like to highlight here, is more about why its integration is even more important today, and specifically talking about what integration provides much more of a competitive differentiation. So I mentioned about like creating digital services, creating much more faster services. So there's this concept of SMAC IT, or social mobile analytics, or IoT type of technologies. The challenge is most of these technologies, right? Like for the easiest example is SaaS applications. If I'm in a business today, regardless of which industry I'm in, if I want to create a SaaS applications, it's not that difficult to do it. I mean, I can go, maybe I have multiple choices. I can create an application. That's not a problem. If I can create an application that fast, like my SaaS application, I can procure it much faster. Even my competitor can do the same thing. Think about it, right? My competitor can do exactly the same thing. That's not what gives you the differentiation. The differentiation is more about how you can use all these different services in unison to provide a very curated experience to your customer, a differentiated experience to your customer, a new business model for that matter, right? Or a new ways to reach your customers. That's what the integration provides. So this was just a quote in one of the articles in Harvard Business Review, and it kind of really highlights more from how you look at your platform architecture about, yes, the discrete services are important, but it's also about how you now connect those services together to provide that experience. So the other thing I wanted to talk about here was the need to integrate apps where they're deployed is actually even more important today. So we worked with IDC on this info brief called Agile Integration for Cloud-Enabled Enterprise, and we got some interesting kind of like findings in that particular report. The first thing was what we see is that, and this is broadly what IDC has already reported out, is that there isn't one dominant cloud. So when you look at it, there's not really a single cloud. There have been different clouds like AWS, SaaS applications, financial clouds, and all these are there, right? So regardless of you saying, okay, these are the different clouds that are also, when you procure an application, say a financial application or a healthcare application, these are different clouds that you have to deal with. But at the same time, what you're also seeing is that 45% run bespoke applications in a private cloud or planning to implement that within the next 12 months. What it really means is that there is a need to integrate apps where they are deployed, regardless of which cloud you're in. And because you also have to deal with these bespoke applications, which are actually increasing. Maureen mentioned about this in our earlier talk about the increase about the bespoke applications. So there is a need to now keep integrating these apps as much as possible, right? Integration is kind of like a capability that you need as part of your application development process itself. So why is the traditional integration failing, right? As I mentioned earlier, we have been doing integration before, and typically we are using a product like an enterprise service bus, and that worked fine for several years. Like typically it was deployed in a centralized architecture fashion where you have one centralized ESB where everything gets connected to it, and it worked a while because you are able to control it, you're able to know, okay, what's going on, and all your applications to connect to this one place. The challenge, and again, it may work even in your case right now. For certain use cases, maybe it's perfectly fine. The challenge is with the advent of microservices, mobile, cloud, new scenarios, new use cases, the cloud scenarios that are coming up. What happens is there's thousands of applications that you have to deal with. Now you have to deal with 100,000 applications with all these microservices coming up. This centralized architecture is not going to help you. In fact, what happens is the centralized architecture can quite often could be hindrance to your innovation cycle, right? And that's the key thing that we wanted to highlight here. Sometimes with this centralized architecture, you will not be able to now deliver those digital services much more quickly. Okay, so what is needed, and sorry guys for this. So what is needed is much more of an API-enabled integration architecture where multiple applications actually now talk to each other using an API. The benefit of API is that it's an easy way by which different applications that can interact with each other. At the same time, when you now use that from a cloud foundation perspective, you can now scale those APIs, you can scale down those APIs depending upon your requirements. So moving from a centralized hub architecture to much more of a decentralized architecture. Now, Maureen spoke about this, that decentralization, there is a kind of like a trend of moving more into a decentralized type of a deployment or architecture. And having a more of an API-based approach helps you with that. In addition, the advantage of that is also it allows you to, with much more, it benefits more from an agility perspective, because now once you have it much more of an API-based decentralized architecture, it provides you to now innovate in a much more faster fashion. And we'll talk more about that. So that brings to the point of about agile integration. So the key thing with agile integration is that it's an architectural approach. It's not a product. So it's an architectural overall approach. And let me just kind of explain about that, right? So when we talk to different customers, like customers like you, we see that oftentimes these are some of the set of common challenges that you face in the industry today. The first one is more about integrating SaaS applications. As you procure more SaaS applications in the cloud or your existing workloads move into the cloud, you need a way by which you can connect those SaaS applications. Allowing customers and partners access to your enterprise systems and creating much more of a new value streams with your partners is very important. How do you do that? When you look at IoT devices and IoT architectures, how do you do that? How do you plan? How do you connect that data together? You have different IoT applications, how do you do that? And depending upon which industry you are in, right? Maybe if you're in a transportation industry, that becomes even more important. But also if you're in a healthcare industry, more about like what are the things that you can now track about, say, biometrics or something like that. Again, different types of things, right? And the other one would be, it's always the case, extending your legacy applications. Now, legacy applications don't just go away, but you need a way by which you can now use them in a much more of an appropriate fashion. And oftentimes what we see is that you kind of take one initiative and then you just work on that one initiative. So for example, integrating SaaS apps, or you may just maybe get an iPaaS solution and it just connects your SaaS app to your existing app and you're done with it. The challenge is, the slide that I showed first was, as a company, you have to deal with lots and lots of data. How do you now analyze that data with other things that are coming more from an IoT perspective or other thing that's coming more from a partner perspective? So the succeeding in this requires more of a strategic platform approach, and instead of just being more of a point-based approach. And that's what the agile integration is about. So agile integration, think about it as an architectural approach. Think about it as a framework that defines the interoperability across different services within your organization or with your partners, but with the focus on application development and agility. That's very important. Maureen mentioned about this, that one of the trends that we are seeing is that as you develop your applications or as you develop your apps or digital apps, integration should just be part of that. Integration capability should be a key capability in that infrastructure or in that process. That's what agile integration is about. It's about using the tools and processes that are effective to provide you those agile software development, right? It's not about just creating your software. It's about looking at your entire platform architecture and how do I deliver these services in a much more quicker fashion. So there are three pillars of, so when you look at really what agile integration is about, it has three essential capabilities. The first one is distributed integration. Distributed integration is an integration that is much more lightweight, pattern-based, event-oriented, and much more community source. Again, that's what provides you the flexibility. I'll talk more about this. The second one is APIs. Having an API-based approach, an API strategy to now create your services, share your services, monitor your services, and manage your services. Analyze the API usage is very important. That in turn provides you the reusability. And basing all of that on a container-based approach it provides you really the scalability and agility. Providing a containers provide you a platform to now develop your services, manage your services, scale your services in a profoundly different fashion. So those are like kind of like a high level 3 key foundational capabilities of Agile integration. So when you look at distributed integration, that's what provides you the flexibility. Again, deploying integrations where you want it to be deployed. The challenge with those centralized architecture, again, it may work fine for certain of your use cases, but as new use cases come, that is not going to help you. That's where you need a capability that allows you to now create your integrations and most importantly, providing you the option to now deploy it the way you want it to be deployed. The same technology that allows you to now deploy it in the centralized fashion if you wanted to deploy it that way for certain use cases, but also allow you to now deploy it with the applications as your needs are. That's very important. Enabling microservices style architecture. When you create these microservices, having a way by which, capability by which you can connect those microservices together. The capabilities that integration needs, typically like transformation, connectivity, are still required in a microservices style architecture. And you'll hear more about this later in the day today. Containers, again, provides the scalability. Again, by far a totally different way to develop, manage, and deploy your apps. Again, when you look at modernizing your infrastructure, including your services as part of a continuous process about CI/CD, containers play a very important role. And it kind of like provides you a way to now enables the decentralization. It allows you and provides a way by which you can now deploy your services across different clouds. And APIs, lastly, again, APIs are, I kind of think about APIs as more or less like a Lego pieces that you can understand and you can connect depending upon, like, you can really, the challenge with before APIs was that you could do the same thing, but then it was difficult in terms of the different web service standards and everything. So it was like really hard to interoperate. With APIs, it's becoming, they are much more well-defined, much more shareable. So it's easier now to communicate with other applications to kind of share your services. So that's very important. And when you have an API approach, managing those APIs becomes equally more important. How do you analyze those APIs? What's happening with those APIs? And I'll give you some examples of customers who are now doing this. So having a visibility and control over your APIs is also very important. And lastly, like, having these capabilities is important. Now, the key thing is you do not need all these capabilities all at one time. It's a journey for you. I would be wrong here if I stand here and say that, oh, you need all of them all at one time. Well, you need to choose which capabilities you want. You need to analyze your own environment. But having those capabilities as part are also not going to be enough. But having the right tools and processes that go along with that enable you that continuous process is actually very important, very, very important. This technology itself is not going to help you, but the associated updates to the process is very important. When you look at CI/CD or a DevOps process, that's a different thing that you have to adapt to. So looking into that as an overall is actually very important. So that's, again, it's a critical journey for most organizations. I'm not going to say that's easy. It's something that you have to really think about more or less from a platform architectural approach. So let's take an example of 2 customers that I wanted to talk about who have already embarked on this journey. And the reason I wanted to highlight them was kind of just to show you the journey some of the customers have taken so far. So the first example is a customer, Schiphol Airport. So as you must probably already know, Schiphol is one of the busiest airports in Europe, and one of their key challenges was to become the best digital airport in the world and improve passenger experience. They actually started on this journey almost, I would say, around 4 years back, quite like around 3.5 to 4 years back. And then the first thing they did was, okay, you know what, if we want to be a digital airport and provide that experience to our customers, we want to make sure that we create like an API foundation, like a foundation by which all our applications actually talk to each other using an API. So they actually did that first. So what they did was they had a proprietary system before, and then instead of that they actually use Fuse technology to now create their APIs and connect those APIs together. They used that first, created that API foundation. So all their different applications now talk to each other using an API. After they did that, after 1.5 years or after they did that, what they decided to do was then say, okay, now I have created this API foundation, now let's look into how we can share those APIs, how we can manage those APIs. That's where 3-scale API management came in. And the advantage with 3-scale that they got was they were able now to manage those APIs, to kind of get more analytics on those APIs and share those APIs with their customers and partners. This is very important because that allowed them to create really some higher level services when you talk about improving the passenger experience, that allowed them to give that experience to the customer. An example, we all go to the airport most of the times to fly. Oftentimes when you go to an airport, you use the Wi-Fi network. So question I have with everyone is the Wi-Fi network provided by the airport itself? No, typically not. It's usually a partner for the airport that provides the Wi-Fi network. Typically when you connect to the Wi-Fi network or whoever is the provider will provide you some extra information, right? Okay, what's happening with your bags? What's happening with your flight information? If your flight information changes, how did that partner get all this information? If you think about it. What happens is Schiphol Airport, they created that API using Fuse, and once they created that API, they shared those APIs with their partners. Now, partner could be anyone, but depending upon which partner it is, they can take those APIs. But once they use those APIs, they can use those APIs now to create a differentiated experience for you as a passenger. So as a passenger, it's all seamless to you behind the scenes. But what's happening is the partner is now using those APIs provided by Schiphol to create that experience. At the end, from a Schiphol perspective, you as a passenger, you got the good experience, you got a best experience. That's what matters. So that's one of the advantages of using API management. And Steve will talk more about this, specifically about APIs and the new things. And lastly, what Schiphol did was I would say around 1.5 years back, they said, okay, we did the API foundation. We use API management now to create more or less like a partner services, explore these new services. So then they said, okay, now why don't we now take that to the next level by creating more or less like a cloud foundation around it, so that we can now deploy these services much faster, scale these services as the requirements increase, and scale down when we don't need them. Then that's when they basically adopted the container platform. They adopted the OpenShift container platform. And with the OpenShift container platform, that allowed them to now create a cloud infrastructure that can now be deployed across different clouds. So they do it to deploy across Azure as well as AWS. So that's kind of like one story that I wanted to highlight here. The other one that I wanted to this is pretty interesting that I want to talk about was the government of British Columbia, again, a local Canadian company. And one of their big challenge was that they were using pretty much proprietary and outdated systems that was really kind of like monolithic applications. So for them, if they wanted to create new services, the problem with that was the entire process to create the new service, all the way from kind of asking for a virtual machine, would take them like it would take them like 3 weeks to even procure a virtual machine. From that point onwards to deliver a service, it would take them at least like 3 months or 4 months to do that. And they were like, no, we don't want to do it this way. So what they wanted to do was actually now use much more of a innovative public service to meet the customer demands much more faster and to provide a totally new experience to its customer. So what they decided to do was they started adopting open source technologies. What they wanted to do was quite different. What they wanted to do was more or less like use the open source. Open source is more about collaboration. Red Hat does it all the time with all their technology. It's more about different like developers coming together, collaborating to create a technology. They wanted to apply that same thing as they provided experience to their customers, right? What they did was they created this something based on open source technology as well as the container based technology. They created this platform called the BC Developers Exchange platform, which is kind of like an open source platform where private citizens could now come together, look at the advancement or the APIs that are being developed, and then can collaborate on that. A good example of this is they had a project called like a highway camera project, and the highway camera project is like they have cameras across different highways, and what it captures information from what is happening on the road. So what they did was they actually used, created different sets of APIs to provide this information. So for example, information about traffic, information about accidents, they use an API. So earlier there was no API, so they created that API. But what they did was they put that API in this developer exchange. So they made that API public to everyone. Advantage of this is now as a private citizen and other innovators, you can actually look at these APIs and you can provide your feedback to them, and then you can actually innovate on it. Which means that what happened is one of their quick things was, now they had a private software development firm that took some of those APIs and actually created a mobile application that would now tell the location of where that accident is. So think about it this way, right? You have a government company using that APIs, using an open source framework to now collaborate in a much more open fashion with the public, get the input, get the innovation, and provide a higher level services to its citizens. So it's actually a really great use case about using this technology, but overall looking at their platform architecture all the way from cloud, containers to APIs and how they can now collaborate. So again, these were like some of the examples that I wanted to kind of just share as some of the companies that have already embarked on this. Like with Schiphol, a 3-year journey all the way from distributed integration to API management, and then to containers. And in this case, British Columbia, more about creating those APIs, distributed integration, and then the containers, infrastructure, and open source. So next I wanted to just give a quick overview of the technology that aligns with this capability. So with respect to distributed integration, Red Hat JBoss Fuse is a lightweight integration platform that provides the distributed integration capability. It also includes messaging. So messaging also plays a very important role in terms of doing the real-time communication. We also have a separate product, JBoss AMQ, but that's all included as part of Fuse. For APIs, you have Red Hat 3-Scale API management platform that provides you a way by which you can manage and control those APIs. And from a container, it's a Red Hat OpenShift platform. Oftentimes you will see that your requirements don't just stop at these capabilities. You often need adjacent capabilities like rules management capability or a BPM capability. And we at Red Hat, we have all of those capabilities. You'll hear a lot about specifics of these capabilities more as we go towards today. So for example, like distributed integration, Keith will talk more about this. APIs, Steve will talk more about this in the next session. And containers and microservices, you'll have Christian Posta talking about overall microservices approach. So as a wrap, I think it's critical that agility is very important today as you deliver services. Again, you do not want to be the blockbuster in your industry. So you want to innovate in a much more faster fashion. You want to have an overall platform approach to do that. So it's important and critical to really think about this agility and not just about creating your software, but how you can develop this across your different cross-functionally and create those APIs, create those reusable interfaces. So it's very important. So a couple of things you could do is, the first thing is evaluate your existing capabilities, right? What's like your existing infrastructure, how you deliver those services, what are your bottlenecks? Identify those bottlenecks. Where are the things that you can experiment in a much more faster fashion? Are you using APIs today? If you want to use them, where can you start doing that? We have some examples that we can share, but how do you do that? But kind of analyzing how fast you're developing those, right? So if today you have an initiative coming up, how fast are you able to deliver on those initiatives? And not just about delivering it, but how can you now be much more innovative when you actually do that? As your requirements change, can you do that in a much more faster fashion? We also have the Red Hat technology that I mentioned. You can evaluate them. Again, you do not need all of them all at one time, but you can certainly pick and choose which one you want to like. You can start with Fuse just to create an API, but you can also start with the container platform to Atlas. That's what British Columbia did, government of British Columbia did. Also, you can, if you have existing APIs, you can start, saying, okay, let me manage those APIs and see how that happens, or share with our partners. At Red Hat, we also have a lot of support that we can offer, more from a discovery session perspective. We do run workshops, so if your teams want to now really play with this technology, really analyze them, kind of just get a feel of them, we do have workshops that are pretty much ongoing. We have a lot of material, customer examples that we can actually share. And the key thing I would like to really say towards the end is that we want to help you where you want to go. So in your journey of the service that you're providing to your business, we would want to be a partner with you. So we are not saying that you got to start and do all of this all at one time. We will actually help you be there. So again, we have, and today, as we progress towards the day, we have a lot of speakers who will actually now talk more about specific of these different technologies.
So at my company, they want to move to a containerized architecture, but they also want to keep the ESB. While you said the ESB is dead, it's replaced by these APIs now. What do I tell them? We shouldn't keep ESB because?
The ESBs that you have today, right, they have evolved over a period of time, right? You use those ESBs to connect to different systems. It's not possible, I was an architect before, it's not possible to rip apart that entire thing and say, okay, move everything here. It's not possible to do that. You have to now really understand, the first thing is with that centralized ESB architecture, maybe there are certain use cases that are perfectly fine in that architecture. But if you are now looking at innovative new services, new digital services, you should really experiment with another type of technology, like more of a distributed type of integration technology. So I would urge that you can now look at your overall platform architecture to now look at all these different capabilities. Since you're already adopting containers in some fashion, it's not really that difficult to now look at integration technology, more of a distributed integration technology, and use that as an experimentation and then see how that goes, right? I would say that look at your overall architecture, use ESB where it suits you, like that architecture, but the capabilities that the ESB provides, transformation, connectivity, composition, are still relevant even in a new innovative world. So now leverage the container architecture that you have and now deploy your integrations as part of your application development itself.